people, so this is episode 2 of my 1/10th rally car build. If you want to win this car, just check how many subscribers I've got. If it's less than 1,000, all you have to do for a chance to win this is to subscribe to my channel and leave me a comment. So in this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at how to shim up and get rid of this rocking in the suspension assembly, and then also look at what adjustments we can make to the suspension to increase the ride height and see what sort of height we can get out of this. If we have a look underneath here, we'll see that there's quite a bit of play in that. And in order to get rid of that, what you want is a packet of shimming washers. Now I've got 20 in here. These are 3mm on the inner diameter and 6mm on the outer diameter. Then I've got two thicknesses. I've got 0.1mm and 0.3mm. So I just pour these out. So you can see the anthracite coloured ones. These are the 0.3. And then the shiny silver ones are 0.1. We've got two of them there, and now we're going to see if it fits inside that gap. So if I push them in, you can see that's still a little bit loose, so I'm going to try with one more. And you see that fits nice and snug. So now all I've got to do is do the fiddly bit and slide those in there. So I know it's going to take 3, so I'm going to put those down to one side. Just pop this out. Right, I don't want to be fiddling around with the dog bone, so I'm just going to take that out and place it to one side because it's easy to put it back in afterwards. And then I'm going to get my 3 washers and just pop them over the end there. Just like that. If you come in at an angle like this, you can see that rod's going to just hold them in place as you wiggle this in. And then all I've got to do is go around the 4 corners and then we're done on that. The next thing that I want to do is the drive shafts. So in order to do that, I'm going to use shims. This time I've got a slightly different size. If we have a look in here, I've got 5mm inner diameter by 7mm outer diameter shims, and I have a selection of thicknesses. In order to fit these to the drive shaft, what I've got to do is first take apart the hub assembly. So I'm going to pull those apart, have a quick look at it. This is the front drive hub. So if I pull off the drive hex and the little locking pin, the drive cup slides out, and then you've got an inner bearing and an outer bearing. And if I just pop the outer bearing out, you'll see that in the middle there's a little plastic spacer. If you were missing that, or if it was on an old car and that was missing, you can take the measurement down to the lip, which on this one is 4mm. Then you can measure down to the inner face of the bearing, which on this one is 5.5mm. So we know that that spacing in between the bearings needs to be 1.5mm. So the easiest way to get 1.5mm is to use 5.3 spaces. Put these over the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's worth always checking that you don't have two stuck together. So you can slide the outer bearing back on then. And now if I slide this pin through, the locking pin, you can see there's still a gap and it's quite loose. So what I want to do is shim this as tight up as I can get it. So I've got 2.4mm shims here, so 0.8mm. You can see that this is just fits back through, and that's completely solid now. There's absolutely no play whatsoever in that. That's pretty much it. That's how you shim the bearings on the drive axle, and there's no way you can tighten that too tight. It's just going to spin freely. So you can see how smooth those are now. With these control arms and the steering linkages, what you can do to tighten those up, it's really simple. If you just get a small rubber O-ring like this one and then pop it over the little ball like that. So what that's going to do is once you pop that control arm back on, the little rubber O-ring is going to push the control arm up so it's always seated tightly. Now that we've tightened everything up and done all the shimming, the final thing that I wanted to have a look at was the ride height and how we can adjust this to get some more ride height out of it. If we look at how this is set up out of the box, it's very low to the ground. It's about 5.5mm on the rear and about 5mm at the front. If we take a look at the rear suspension tower, you can see there's not a whole lot we can do here to increase the ride height other than move this ball joint across one, and the lower ball joint across one as well. And then on the front, we've got even less room to manoeuvre. We can move this ball joint across one, and that's about it. There is an optional suspension tower for the front, but it doesn't allow us to do anything more than that. I'm going to pop those across just to see how much ride height we can get out of it, but it looks like we're going to have to extend these shocks a little bit in order to get some more clearance off of the ground. Okay, so if we take a look at the front, that's got us up to 12mm on the front, and if we have a look at the rear, that's brought us up to 12 as well on the rear. You can see that on the rear, we're just short of touching the chassis. If we turn it around and have a look at the front, you can also see there's a tiny bit of extra room, only a couple millimetres. If we put some longer shocks on the car, we'd get a little bit more ride height too. So I've got a set of shocks off of an old RS4, and these are about 5mm longer. So if I swap these over for the factory ones, I should get about an extra couple millimetres on the front and rear. So if we look at the back now, you can see that that's maxed out the ride height, and the suspension arm is touching the chassis, and if we look at the front, you can see that the suspension is also touching the chassis at the front. So on the rear, that's gotten us up to 19mm, and if we have a look at the front, that's put us up to 16mm. There is one last thing we can do to increase the ride height further, and that is to put some off-road tyres on. The diameter of the road tyre is 66mm, whereas with the rally tyre it's 72. So with all the mods done, we end up with a clearance on the rear of just over 22mm. And if we have a look at the front, we end up with just over 19mm. If you're enjoying the series, join me in the next video. I'll be installing the electronics and going through how to set them up.